So, a movie on fills and strokes, probably not the most exciting movie that you can imagine watching, but it's going to give you some really useful tips and tricks on how to make the best of working with fills and strokes in Illustrator. So when you create a shape in Illustrator or draw a line in Illustrator, it will have a fill and stroke property. And the default is for it to stroke the item with black and fill it with white. And you can get back to your default by clicking on this button here at any time. And notice when I do that, it resets it also to a 1-point stroke. Now, the control panel up here also gives you access to the colours, and you can go into here and actually select colours if you want to. So I could change the fill colour to green, for example. Now, if I was to try and do that down here, if I click on the swatch down here, I actually bring up the colour picker where I can change colours. Okay, not quite as intuitive, but still another option in order for you to be able to choose colours. But I quite like just being able to click and select a colour in here. And if you hold down Shift when you click it, you get mixers. So if you want to maybe mix colour using HSB, which is my favourite, I can just tweak that colour. So really having access to the colour mixer up here is a really nice touch. Same with your stroke, you can just choose a swatch, and then if you want to adjust the swatch, just hold down Shift and click again, and you can just perfect it and get it exactly the colour that you want. Next to that we have our stroke weight, and stroke weight is pretty self-explanatory. You just go up and down in increments of 1. You can use the arrow keys on the keyboard when that's selected to go up and down in increments of 1. If you hold down Shift, you go in increments of 10, and you can go in increments of points by holding down the Command key or Control key if you're on Windows. So lots of control there. There's also a drop-down menu where you can choose preset sizes. Now, we also have this hyperlink here which takes us to the stroke panel, but for now we're going to continue on in the control panel and we'll come back to that in a minute. So in here I can choose variable width profiles, so instead of having an even weight throughout the whole line, I could choose to make it fatter in the middle and thinner at the ends, for example. Or I can make it a bit wiggly by creating a variable width profile that changes throughout here. And you can actually adjust this width further with the width tool, which we'll be having a look at in another lesson. Now you can also select brushes, so we can put things like pattern brushes and scatter brushes and art brushes onto our lines using this tool here. And any brushes that you've loaded will appear in here. You can also get access to the libraries directly in here by going down here. And again, we'll have a look at brushes later, so I'm going to just select the default 5-point round brush for now. We then have opacity settings. You have a drop-down menu, and we can also click on the opacity hyperlink and choose blending modes to blend the stroke with other layers. We can adjust the opacity, make it semi-transparent. We can make masks and do all sorts of other clever things with knockout groups and isolating blending. I'm going to leave that for now, for another day, and we're going to close that. And then we have layer styles. You can actually apply graphic styles to your strokes, and we will be having a look at that later. Then over here you have things like the transform panel, so if you just wanted to actually change the size of the stroke, you can do here. Now, incidentally, you'll notice when I scale this up, notice that the stroke doesn't scale, okay? It just stays at the same weight. So we don't get a fatter stroke, we just get the same weight of stroke but bigger. If you click on the transform hyperlink, you can actually say scale strokes and effects. Now that was normally only available in the preferences, but it's now available in there. So I can just click and drag, and it now scales the stroke as well as the effects. Now that's an option that you can turn on and off in there. You can also align it to your pixel grid, rotate it if you need to. Again, using the arrow keys, I can put a rotation in there or a skew. So really lots and lots of options in here, and you've got selection and isolation options up here as well. Now when I have an object selected like this, I may not want to have a fill in it, and quite often accidentally draw things that have fills in them, and if you don't see the transparency grid, sometimes you can be unaware that there's a fill in there. One of my favourite keyboard shortcuts in terms of fills and strokes is just to hit the / tool. So when the fill color is at the front, I can hit / and that's just going to remove the fill for me. I can do the same if I bring the stroke color to the front. I can choose no fill for that as well. Let's just undo that so we've got a stroke on there. You can use X on the keyboard to jump between fill and stroke, by the way, which is another handy keyboard shortcut. So quite often what I'll do is I'll choose the default colors. So it's D for default. Then I will choose X to switch fill and stroke, / to remove the stroke. And that's a series of keyboard shortcuts that I find really useful with fill and stroke. So that's D to select default colors, / to select no fill or stroke, and X to switch between the two. So let's have a look at this again. Let's just make that a little bit bigger, that stroke. And at the moment, you'll see we've got sharp ends to our stroke, and I can hide the selection by hitting Command H, and that just makes it easier for us to see what's going on as I make changes, and that would be Control H on Windows. If I click on stroke, I can open up my stroke panel. So I'm going to close that, and instead I'm going to go to the window menu and choose my stroke panel, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Command F10. You can also select it in the Essentials workspace by clicking on the stroke button here, and that's going to open up my stroke panel. Now at the moment we can only see the weight, but if we click on the wing menu and say show options, we get all the options, and I can do things like create round edges for my path, and you'll notice now we have nice smooth round edges. Or I can extend the edges but keep them square and create a projecting cap, but I'm going to keep that on round cap. We also have some other options for corners. If I select this square down here and choose round corners, you'll notice I get slight round edges. Now, if I was to extend the stroke so it's aligned to the outside of my path, I can see even rounder edges. So I have alignment options as well. So if we have a look at the alignment options, if I want, I can place the stroke inside the path, or halfway between the path, which is default, or outside the path. And then I also have options for the corners. So I've got bevel join, round join, or the regular miter join. So those are some options that we have available here for our strokes. Now we also have dashed lines. So if I select this one here and I click on dashed line, notice we're now getting little dashes, and you can determine the weight or the length of these dashes by typing a value in here. So if I change that to 20, the dashes become longer. I can also determine the size of the gaps. So if I put 20 in there, it doesn't make a difference because at the moment that's exactly the same as entering nothing here, because it will default to using the same measurement for dash and gaps. But if I put that up to 30, you'll start to notice a difference. So now the gaps are bigger than the dashes. And you've got the option of making, if you leave it like that, it will be an even distribution. But you've got an option of making an uneven distribution of dashes. So I could put 10 in here, and then maybe 5 in here. And you'll see that I start to get a different pattern of dashes by putting in uneven spacing. Now I'm going to undo those last two steps and keep it even. We also have options about new options for CS6 on how to preserve the dash and gap lengths. And that's really for things like closed paths. So, and these will help you distribute the dashes around shapes. Quite often, if you add a dashed line to a shape, for example, and create a dashed line on that, well, it looks okay here, but sometimes if you add a dashed line, you can end up with the two shapes grouping together. And this will help preserve exact dash and gap lengths if you click on that. And if you have a problem, you can click on this and it will adjust the lengths to fit. You'll see there's a little movement there. We've got a smaller gap here than here with our default setting. So by clicking on Align Dashes to Corners and Path Ends, it just redistributes the path so that we get a nicer looking distribution. Same here with the default setting, the distribution of the dashes is all wrong, but if we select this new option, which is new to CS6, it will align the dashes and try and adjust the spacing in between. So if the spacing between the dashes is vitally important, you probably want to stick with the default preserving one. But this one allows you to distribute dashes and gaps around shapes more easily. So I can also adjust the width profile in here. So if I want to choose a different width profile so that this is fatter in the middle and thinner on the outside, I can also do that directly in this palette. Now we also have options for arrowheads. If I select this path here and go down to the bottom here, I can add arrows to the ends of my path. Let me just select that again. And there we have one arrow at one end, and we'll get a different arrow at the other end. Now, obviously, I would probably want to scale that down, so I can scale these down. Now, you'll notice that as I applied that, it wasn't really aligned properly. So you have different alignment options now. You can extend the arrow to the end of the path, which gives me a much better look than how it was before, which is to place the arrow at the tip of the path. So I'm going to extend the arrow tip beyond the end of the path, and I'm going to just adjust the scale of my beginning arrow, bring that down a little bit. And in fact, I'm going to choose a different one. So we've got the same one at either end. So different alignment options for arrowheads, depending on what you want, whether you want it aligned to the direction of the path or extending from the path. So many new features, so little time. So that's a little bit about strokes. As I said, the other thing to be aware of is with text, you have to kind of be aware that you can fill text with a colour. So obviously we could choose a colour and fill the text with a colour, and that will fill the text. You cannot fill it with a gradient, however. Notice how it fills it with black when I choose gradient. So we don't get the expected result when we select gradient for text. So a workaround for that would be to select the text and create outlines for it. So let's just select this piece of text. Okay, and go to type and make sure I've selected it. Now I'm getting confused because I've hidden my selection. So I'm going to bring my selection back by hitting Command H again, or Control H. And this time I'm going to go to type, create outlines. And now that I have outlines, I can choose a gradient fill. Now to make selections between fill color, gradient and none, you can go between the comma key, which is a solid fill, to the period key or full stop key if you're from the UK, and then / is fill with none. And those will use your last chosen color and your last gradient chosen. If you want to look at swatches, there are lots of swatches that you can use up here to try filling your text with different patterns and gradients. So have a look at the swatches and experiment with a few different fills and strokes on your text.